Difficulties. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek, and this is my co-host.
Cindy Drucker. I'm a host of NTD's International Roundtable, and today we are co-hosting this special event.
So we're going to be covering a pretty tough subject today, and that's child trafficking in America. And particularly the question of what's happening to these unaccompanied migrant children that are crossing the border. And we've learned some really troubling things, actually, from people who have put everything on the line to reveal these facts. So let me introduce our guests today. First, we have Tara Rodas. Tara's been on American Thought Leaders before. She's a whistleblower who has testified both in the US House and the US Senate about what she witnessed firsthand while on a temporary assignment with HHS. She's a 20-year public servant and has worked most of her career in the Federal Inspector General community. And over here we have Aaron Stevenson, and Aaron is a former intelligence research specialist for US Citizenship and Immigration Services, who became a whistleblower when he uncovered some very troubling truths. And finally, we have Mary Flynn O'Neill, who's the executive director of America's Future, the nonprofit. They've been doing remarkable grassroots work, educating the public across America about the realities of child trafficking and how to make a difference.
So this is a particularly tough topic, and I think a lot of people don't really understand the scope of it. So let's start there. Tara, can you explain to us, just give us a sense of the scope of the problem, what we're actually talking about today?
Sure. Well, Jan and Cindy, thank you so much for having us here to talk about what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking. And what's happened is more than 500,000 children have come from their countries to the U.S. border. And then the U.S. government has a program that is white glove delivering them to people who we know are criminals, traffickers, and because of Aaron's disclosure, members of transnational criminal organizations. And the children have just disappeared. We don't know where they are. And that's very troubling that children are missing in America.
Well, what do you mean exactly by disappeared?
Yeah, so the U.S. government no longer can say where the children are. So the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General, has said the children aren't showing up for their immigration hearings, so they have no way to check on them. Some of them haven't even received a notice to appear, so no one will ever know where are the children.
And just when you say over 500,000, right, you kind of, I mean, surely not all these children have been trafficked, right? Like this is, what is that reality?
Well, we know they were all smuggled to the border because who at 7 or 8 years old is going to be able to cross from a country into another country? I mean, anyone can see that children can't make it to the United States of America on their own. So everyone agrees they were smuggled here. The question is what happens to them after?
Right.
What happens? And we do know, due to some of the reporting, even at the New York Times, that less than 10% of the children are actually, in some zip codes, going to their parents. Less than 10%.
And, you know, Mary, Aaron, please feel free to jump in here.
Sure. So at the beginning of 2021, he's starting to see this, and at the same time, the federal government makes an all call to all federal employees and says, we have a crisis at the southern border. We need help with people to come and place these children with family here in the United States. So I was looking at an announcement saying, hey, we need federal employees. If you have language skills, that's great. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker. And we need you guys to come help these children. So I thought, I'm going on the humanitarian mission of my lifetime. And I thought, what more better thing could I do than to be there, greet the children, play games, do puzzles. And sadly, once I ended up getting on the ground and working in case management, seeing what was happening with the children, we started to see, my team, in June of 2021. So he's seeing aliens, right, these transnational organized criminals sponsoring the kids. We're seeing what we were calling suspicious sponsor. So it was early June when we sent in the first suspicious sponsor, not knowing that one child had ever been trafficked through this program.
Well, what was the red flag that made it suspicious?
The children were saying, the flood of all these kids, but then also the children saying, children on their own, revealing they weren't going to their parents and that they didn't actually know who they were going to, that they were coming for work. and that they had been being told stories, because trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion.
Right.
And that's what's happening. The children are being lured with a story, right? They're being told, hey, you're only making $2.50 a day in your home country. And they're telling the child and the parent, you know, you're only making $2.50 a day. But if you come to the United States, if you let your child come with us to the United States, we're going to pay the journey. You know, we're nice. We're going to pay the journey. Now, they're going to have to pay the debt off once they get here. But we're going to pay them $6 an hour.
It's the recruiting.
Yeah, so the children believe, and the families believe, they're going to be Elon Musk rich. These children
And
think
in
they're
good hands.
Yeah, and in good hands.
Because the government's doing it.
Yeah, the government. It's the
Right.
U.S. government.
Right. And that comes into the NGOs that are
Yeah.
recruiting.
So it's, NGOs are going to these
They're
families,
working.
villages.
They're
and-
already working for the government, recruiting down in, international areas, outside the border, to recruit
Yeah.
And there's also the
with these promises. They'll be taken care of. Now those are faith-based. Most of them.
well,
Most of them,
Yeah.
which we know from the grand jury, that took place in Florida, which was amazing. That these are faith-based. They were receiving money. They still receive money from the government, and that's this trusting of these families outside our country, and they're recruiting children because they're trusting, because they're Christian or other faith, Christian, Judeo-Christian. There's a Jewish foundation. There's a Lutheran social services. So there's other, so they're in the trusting hands of faith-based.
There's no reason to be suspicious in other
Right.
words.
nice smiling people.
Okay,
involved.
you're going to take my child, and my child's going to be safe. It's going to be, they're going to make money up there. We're going to be getting them out of this poverty, this world they're living in, and so forth. And we're bringing them into America.
So what do we know in terms, like, we have some information about what some of these kids have ended up with, the situations they've ended up here, right, on the American side of the border. What's the range of things that can happen to them?
Well,
you start?
Hannah, we could start with the New York Times. Hannah Dreier crisscrossed the country and interviewed children who were saying they were in forced labor conditions. The children are not only working here overnight shifts in slaughterhouses, but they're dying on jobs here. They're in roofing jobs that they're not trained to do.
Yeah.
They don't have the skills to do. Some children are dying like their first week here in the United States. We also know, because reporters who've taken the addresses of suspicious addresses we had, they're knocking on the doors. And there was a girl, 16 years old, in Houston. She said, my sponsor. She says she's my aunt, but I've never met her.
Yeah.
She's pimping me out for sex in the house where I'm living. The children are telling stories of abuse, rape. Some are dying here and working as in slave labor.
Yeah.
We have children, we have child slave labor today.
And a big thing caveat here too is that's doors that we can actually find that they answer to, because a lot of these places, like in Florida, Virginia, they've done it was only like 25 or 28 or 30 or whatever, and it's like what, 5% of the doors actually get answered. The person's actually there, so it's basically was just a landing spot to then move the kid, because
Right.
within a week they're gone.
Right. So that's what we found in Bonita. With that one case, there were 3 houses. So when they bring the kids to one house through a contractor, then they move the children to another house and to another house, and that's how they there's all kinds of behaviors that the traffickers, the Johns and the buyers and sellers, and people that are in this whole, this is a over $150 billion business. That's
What
what we're
specifically?
The trafficking and child exploitation. I'm going to say child exploitation because it covers what you're trying to make a point to, is that there are so many different things that they can use a child to make money off of. Pornography, slave labor, child sex, also breeding children for babies, okay, young girls. That's a thing that they do. Now we're finding another very disturbing pieces and they're all priced at a different level. What we're finding right now is that little boys can be, here we go, turned into a transgender. They can be a boy, girl. So there's these kinds of things that are going on that are very, very specific that buyers and sellers are doing with children. Not only to the point where we end with, a child's physical body they use, and I can say it, is this harvesting of this organ harvesting, and that is something. I spoke about this the other day about, a child that's being raped 10 times, being used over and over and over. A drug can be used once, it's gone. A child can be used over and over and over, but that lifespan is basically 2 years at that pace of making money off of a child.
Sorry, meaning you're going to jump in there too.
Yeah, no,
the
that's
kids don't live beyond years. Is that what you're
Right.
saying?
Well, their life expectancy, their trauma, the physical trauma, the mental trauma, the whole piece of that child. Unless that child, which many of these children are brought to doctors that fix them and get them back working. So no, that lifespan is they can't you can't do that to a child 10 times a day and not expect that child to have the repercussions of that.
This is what you're describing is just kind of a horrific reality, right? And we're talking about 500,000 kids, like you were saying, that we don't really know at this point where they are. Is there some sense of like how many of them are actually being trafficked according to the definition you gave earlier in some way? So again, it's sort of incomprehensible how.
Yeah, it is. It's
I mean,
very
surely
hard.
some
it's very
must
hard.
be being united with families, and there must be some legitimate program here.
We have the data, right, that says in some zip codes, less than 10% of the children go to their parents. And we also have HHS has changed, they've created a new position called a unification specialist, not reunification. So it's no longer family reunification. This is just unifying the child with a sponsor here in the United States. There doesn't have to be any relationship. You don't have to have proof that you are related to this child. You don't have to have proof that you have the financial resources to care for this child. There's no screening to see is the sponsor a criminal.
There's the dropping of protocols.
Yeah,
Gone.
no screening to
So
say
they don't meet them. There's no specific criteria.
No, they
to
don't
be a
meet them.
sponsor.
No,
There's follow up. How are things doing once they go there?
a phone call. A phone call, that's it. Because the U.S. government has no legal obligation, and HHS has said this before Congress many times, we have no legal obligation once the child is out of our custody. So once the child has been turned over, there are no legal ways to check up.
Yeah, they're basically saying, not my job.
Right.
Hey, we did what we had to do. We got the kid in, but
But
everything
then it
else.
ends
Right.
up being nobody's
I was just
job.
gonna say, is it
that-
anybody's job?
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, it is the American. If we're doing this, it is our it's our duty to do it. The American
Yes.
governments are doing it. But as far as job, like the actual roles and responsibilities, no, because of, and this is the complexity of the problem. This whole thing is governed by like a layer of procedure and law. The Florida Settlement Agreement dictates certain things. The Homeland Security Act 2003 dictates certain things. The TVPRA 2008 dictates certain things. And then, of course, you have administrative law in which HHS can determine, like, okay, so now we have this program mission, so we're going to actually change some definitions and how we collect information and what's our system of record in which we actually do case management and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If the goal is to not traffic children, that's not what this thing is. The goal of this thing is to get kid from A to B, out of the country, into the country. And they do that very, very well, because it takes on average 10-ish to 14-ish days, but they're capped at like 30. So within 1 month, they want this kid out the door.
30 days.
30
They
days.
can't have them there any longer.
Yeah, Tara can talk on that.
Well, they move them to another facility,
Yeah.
so that it doesn't appear on a report that a child has been somewhere very long. So they were driving home 10 to 14 days, move this kid. And so what that means is a child has presented alone. Remember, there's no
Yeah.
parent involved here. A child presents at the border to our fine Border Patrol. They take down a U.S. point of contact. You may have seen in the news. The children have a little piece of paper. Sometimes they have a number Sharpied on their arm. It's written in their clothes. So our Border Patrol takes down that U.S. point of contact, and then they have 72 hours to transfer the children from DHS to HHS, our care. Once we get the child, we take that U.S. point of contact that came with the child. We're calling them, hey, are you expecting someone? And our goal was to then move the child to that person in 10 to 14 days. So the child presents information that the U.S. government takes down and says, okay, we're sending the child to that person.
Yeah, and there's no scrutinization there. That's
No screening.
That's the gospel. Oh, that was stapled to this kid's leg? Got it. That's the number we're calling then.
So